On May 4, 1970, at Kent State University in Kent, Ohio, National Guardsmen shot and fatally wounded 4 students at an anti-war rally. 3 out of the 4 students weren't even participating in the rally. I recently sat down with Kent State graduate Jim Dudas, who attended Kent from 1965 to 1970. We talked about the events leading up to, during, and after the shootings. Here is his story.
For most of the time I was at Kent, it was probably one of the most laid-back schools imaginable. It was known as somewhat of a party school. At Kent, a B student was one who focused their studies on beer, bongs, and babes. So it was really a surprise to me when political activism began in late 1969. I was startled to learn that SDS, or Students for a Democratic Society, had begun a chapter on campus. SDS was probably the most radical of the politically fervent left-wing organizations at the time, and it was decidedly against the war in Vietnam. But to find an organization like SDS on a campus, very conservative, middle-class, Midwestern like Kent, was really a surprise to me. Still, at the same time, I just don't think many students at Kent thought much about the war. And the first demonstration I saw, frankly, I was surprised, with kids carrying placards and so forth, shouting, hell no, we won't go, those kinds of phrases. But at the same time, I was strangely intrigued by it. I think I was like a lot of students who were coming face to face with the potentiality of being drafted. We didn't really want to get drafted. It seemed stupid for us, and it just didn't make sense. We didn't understand what the war was trying to accomplish, and still, in all, I would say the majority of students at Kent were more supportive than not of the government. And I can't really say where I felt. I can't look back and say where I felt, where I stood on that, or how I felt. But no, I would not say Kent was a politically charged school at all. It was a party school. Though by that time, around 69, 70, I was pretty serious about my studies and stayed away from the parties because I wanted to graduate and get on with my life. There are probably as many theories about the events leading up to the shootings at Kent as there are theorists that advance them. But here's what I know. On May 1st, a Friday, the bars in downtown Kent were hopping. They were always hopping on a Friday night and on a Saturday night, but they were particularly busy this Friday night because it was probably the first warm spring day that we had, and it was a dandy. It was warm during the day. In the evening, you could wear your cut-off shorts and t-shirts and flip-flops and just party in the bars downtown, and it was great. And it brought out hundreds of people, probably almost 1,000 or more downtown. They were busy places, and the kids were having a great time. Let me note here that Kent was somewhat of a divided town, and you went to Kent, which was off campus. The town of Kent, which was a couple of miles away from the campus, it was the downtown section. But that's where all the bars were. There were the townies, as they were called, and they weren't students at Kent, and they weren't college students at all. In fact, they somewhat resented college students for their seemingly privileged lifestyles, while they had to toil in the factories and in the trades. They also resented college kids for taking over their bars, there in quotes. On one particular strip, which is on Water Street, was really where the trouble started. There were a number of bars that were either towny or collegiate bars, and never the twain shall meet. There was almost no mixing between the bars. One of the bars that welcomed both townies and college students was a place called JB's, and I digress for a moment because it was a unique bar because both the townies and the college students got along there for some reason. It was the only place they got along, and it was mostly because of the music. It featured great bands, and kids loved the music and danced, and it was a lot of fun. JB's, it was not very far from JB's where the trouble started. That Friday night, as a fight between the townies and the collegiates. Who started it? Why it started? I have no idea, nor is it that important. But somehow that fight turned into a full-scale riot. And somehow, further, it progressed into a riot against the war. President Nixon had announced, and I don't remember the proximity of this, but it was nearby, had announced the bombing of Cambodia, and this became the cause célèbre. This was moving out of Vietnam into Cambodia, and this was extending the war, and people didn't want that to happen.
And South Vietnamese units will attack the headquarters for the entire communist military operation in South Vietnam.
My then girlfriend, and now my wife of 34 years, was up for the weekend. We were staying on campus and at a party in somebody's apartment when we heard that the downtown was up for grabs. There were broken windows and storefronts and rocks that were littering the streets. The glass was littering the street along with the rocks. The following day, a Saturday, martial law was declared and the National Guard had been called on the campus.
That are on the college campuses today are the luckiest people in the world.
I am distressed and appalled at the destruction within the city during the past 8 hours. As mayor, I have declared an emergency exists and a curfew will be in effect at 8 p.m. on Saturday, May 2nd, 1970. We ask for the cooperation of all Kent citizens during this period.
That was Kent Mayor Leroy Satram announcing...
My girlfriend and I had made plans that night, which was a Saturday. My girlfriend and I had made plans to see the movie Woodstock at a theater some 25 miles from campus. It had just opened. In retrospect, one of the strangest things that happened was that while we were at the theater, I ran into someone who was no more than a nodding acquaintance who had been in a few classes of mine, who had become a leader in SDS, and he was at the theater. We were not friends by any stretch. I admired him for his intellect, and he was one of the smartest kids I'd ever run into. But I remember that night how he had made a significant effort once he recognized me to say hello, introduce himself to my date. It was really strange. When we got back to campus that night, we learned that the ROTC building had burned to the ground. It was arson, and the SDS was blamed. I will forever believe that the SDS leader who introduced himself in the theater wanted to use me as an alibi should he be questioned as to his whereabouts when the ROTC building was torched.
Chief Miller wants another unit up on campus. The kids have cut the hoses to the fire trucks and they are setting fire to the building. Kent, a mobile one. National Guard is on the interstate. They're coming off the interstate now. They're on the way in up 43rd. I understand they're pulling the fire department out. They're pulling out the fire department. The ROTC building is on fire. Go ahead, he's answering. Have the troops detruck and fix bayonets.
That Sunday, the campus was locked down. Non-students had to leave, so I sent Marcy, my girlfriend, packing.
If the term is meaningful to you, we're in a sense under martial law on this campus. And this is the grave danger, the curiosity seekers moving into the rallies. There's one scheduled at 12 noon. Moving into the rallies, and when your head's busted, or when you're arrested, or when you're tear gassed, you have only yourself to blame.
Monday morning dawned bright and warm. During my first class, my professor spent most of the period talking about the weekend events. He also said something I later found strange. He and his colleagues were advancing the belief that the National Guard did not have live ammunition, but rather rubber bullets. I was at class, and noon there was a scheduled demonstration at what they called the Victory Bell. This was a bell that was hanging in a little bit of a brick edifice that kids used to ring after the football team or the basketball team won an important victory. But this was also, at that time, the staging area for a protest against the war. Somebody brought I'm not sure what you call those, a gong, I guess, and start banging the bell around noon to protest this Cambodia incursion. More and more kids got there. More and more were curious, I think, than they were activists, but they wanted to see what was going on. I was not far from there. I was actually studying in the journalism building, which is where I was. It's called Taylor Hall. And to explain what happened is going to take a book rather than this short period of time that we have here. So I won't necessarily explain what happened. I will just tell you that there was a riot, there was tear gas, students threw rocks. The National Guard, which was on campus, were really kids no older than the kids they were facing, with their bayonets, by the way. They had just come off duty for several weekends where they had been sent to guard overpasses on the Ohio Turnpike because there was a Teamster strike. These guys were pretty tired. They were not riot trained, and they were called to duty at Kent. They were hot. They had full gear on. They had gas masks on. They had helmets. It was sweaty. Push came to shove. The rioters start throwing rocks. The soldiers start moving towards them. The soldiers retreated. The soldiers moved back. Somebody, somewhere, somehow gave what some others thought was an order to fire. M1s went off. They were certainly not rubber bullets because 4 kids died. A number of others were wounded. One person was paralyzed from the neck down.
I did not hear an order.
After the smoke had cleared, no, there was not total chaos on campus. In fact, it became very quiet. Smoke from tear gas was wafting over the football fields, over the commons area. There was a professor, Glenn Frank, a geology professor who I knew and had as a professor for one of his classes, probably one of the best teachers I've ever had.
Listen to me right now. I don't care whether you've never listened to anyone before in your lives. I am begging you right now. If you don't disperse right now, they're going to move in, and it can only be a slaughter. Would you please listen to me? Jesus Christ, I don't want to be a part of this. Please. I'm begging you also. Follow me out this way. Follow me.
He got the kids to quiet down, to move off. This, of course, was after the shootings and before most people actually knew that kids were killed. So there was no campus, quite chaos. Things had quieted down. My dad, who was a World War II vet, saw action in India, actually, said a strange thing to me. He wasn't much of a talker, but he said, "I don't want you going into this war." And it was really a powerful statement for me. I didn't have many choices. I found a way out. I won't digress into that story. I found a way out to get deferred and did not have to serve. So yeah, in some ways it changed me to question government. It taught me to be a skeptic. Not a cynic, but a skeptic. And certainly my newspaper career that occurred right after that, certainly nurtured what I would consider to be a healthy skepticism, but I think it sort of started with Kent.
This piece is dedicated to the 4 students who perished at Kent State that day: Jeff Miller, Bill Schroeder, Allison Krause, and Sandy Shearer.